Hello, and welcome to the Conversation Cabinet. I'm Ethan Bem,
And I'm Josh Reams.
and today we have the External Affairs Officer for the Free Speech Union, Connie Shaw. How are you doing today?
Good, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. No, you've done quite a lot as someone. How old are you? You're quite young.
21.
And you're already on GB News.
People may have seen and heard you on different
Yeah.
news platforms. You're already doing incredibly well.
Thank you.
And you've had quite the experience with the media, to put it lightly. Could you tell us a bit about that?
So I've just graduated from the University of Leeds, but everything sort of started for me when it was this time last year and I was going into my third and final year studying philosophy. And I had been elected to be the daytime editor at Leeds Student Radio. And alongside my committee role, I decided to start my own podcast. And on that podcast, I wanted to talk about wokeism and identity politics and the rising backlash to it. And I interviewed my first episode. Actually, I went to the Reform UK conference and used that content as my first episode. But I also interviewed Charlie Bentley Astor, who is a sister of trans ideology. She was on puberty blockers for a few years. And subsequently, we met each other at a festival, Free Speech Festival last year. And she became my friend. And she kindly accepted my invitation to interview her. And that was when it all sort of started, because one of my friends at the student radio station helped edit the podcast with me because I had never used any of the software before. I was completely self-taught. And he gave me so much of his free time to help me that I just simply tagged him in the caption of an Instagram post where I advertised the podcast. And he received a formal complaint against him from a separate society. Yeah. And they said that he needed to distance himself from me and my work.
Is that because of the topic that was being discussed?
Even though I was talking to someone who had not only identified as trans, but took these drugs, and she now has osteoporosis in her spine, has no idea whether she'll be able to have children or not. It's a very, very serious issue that children are, well, not anymore, luckily, on the NHS, although they are actually, the NHS is still experimenting on kids, but they're not given, it's not a prescribed thing anymore, as it used to be. But it was, even talking about it was enough for the person who'd helped me edit the video, the podcast. He hadn't had any input in the content, but that was enough for him to receive a warning. And so at that point, I bought my Free Speech Union membership because I could sense that eventually they'd try and come for me, because that was not where I wanted to end. I had planned to interview Graham Linehan soon after that at the Battle of Ideas last year. And I mean, it's quite a long story. I don't know how much you want to get into it and like the details of it. But the long and short of it all is that I then interviewed Graham Linehan, who is probably the most cancelled man on this issue. He's the writer of Father Ted and the IT Crowd. And in about 2018, he started talking about trans ideology and the way it's harming women's rights and the impact it's having on children. And he's basically lost all of his work in the UK to the point where he's had to move to America just to get some work, to continue writing comedy. And after I published that episode, I also wrote an article for his Substack. And I wrote that article based on, the title of it was Gender Madness at University. And I just used all the examples I had to explain how this ideology has just taken over the campus, as it has at many universities, but I was just talking about Leeds. And the day after that was published, I got an email telling me that I'd been suspended from my committee position at the radio station.
Wow. What, just because you were talking about that issue? Is it because you offended people? Or?
Well, they didn't tell me. The reason they gave, they said that they had had complaints about my conduct based on my Substack media productions and my social media, but I assume they meant my Twitter. And so I got in touch with the Free Speech Union straight away. They helped me draft emails in response to them, i.e., could you actually specify what it is I've said that has caused for me to be suspended? And they wouldn't. They couldn't specify any further because they said because I'd asked to interview me as part of the investigation. They said that we'll sort of come to the conclusion, this is part of the evidence gathering, so they couldn't give me any more information, which is just ridiculous. And I went to the interview, and they had printed out hard copies of my Substack article and my Twitter, including screenshots of comments from random anonymous people on the internet. Like, my Twitter was growing and you get comments from anyone. And I asked them, are you holding me accountable for what random people on the internet say? And they said, well, you could be held accountable for creating a certain culture. So sorry, what does that? Anyone can comment anything horrible under your post. How has that anything to do with me? But anyway, I kept reminding them that you do know that it's unlawful discrimination to say that because of my gender critical views that I can't access, the student radio station or anything like that. And they said, this is not about your right to hold or express your views. However, how do you maintain an inclusive environment at LSR when your choice to publish your opinions makes some people feel unincluded? To which I can't remember what I said, but it was just extraordinary that they thought that saying two directly contradictory things that I wouldn't be aware that that's what they were doing. Like, it kind of, I've sat there thinking, do you think I'm stupid? Like, you can't at once claim that it's not to do with my opinions and me expressing them, but also how do I maintain an inclusive environment when some people don't like them? Anyway, that investigation, that interview happened, and then several weeks later, I got a letter telling me that I had been permanently removed from my committee position, and the reason they used was that I had apparently brought Leeds Student Radio into disrepute, and they didn't specify how. They still would not tell me how. But at that point, the FSU gave the story to the Telegraph, and then the Telegraph covered it, and then it kind of just spiraled and snowballed from there.
Wow. I think you'll know this more than we do because we haven't been to university yet, but universities tend to be more progressive, both structurally and for people who go to study there. What was it like knowing the majority of people you worked with or were taught by were against what you were believing in? What was that like, especially if you're wanting people to have freedom of speech? What was that like for you? Was it quite threatening?
It felt isolating, but I had spent the summer before, in between my second and third year, I had started questioning gender ideology so much to the point where and I was writing my dissertation on it as well. So I spent the summer researching, and it's what TERF sort of refer to as when you peaked, when you sort of, your eyes are opened, you're like, what the hell? How did I not realize how bad this was? And that's really what happened the summer before. So I went into it thinking, I don't care what people think because this is so bad. And the university is actively encouraging it. You'll be hard pressed to find a university that doesn't have what is referred to as a gender expression fund, and they are grants of in some universities up to £100 that they give to students who identify as trans, non-binary. They say if you identify as intersex, which is insane because the word intersex is referring to a medical condition of a difference in sexual development, which is really serious for some people, can have really sort of life like complications to your life. Like, imagine being born, growing up, and you get to puberty and you always thought you were female, and then you get to puberty and it's like, hang on a sec, actually I'm male. Like, that's a really distressing, can be a really distressing thing to go to. And they're still using the term identify as intersex. Like, come on, it's so offensive. And this money that they give to students, they say it's for gender-affirming products. So that includes makeup, hair, piercings, getting your hair cut, clothes, as well as binders and tuckers. And binders are the extremely tight compression vests that young women put on to make their chests flatter so that they appear more masculine. And on the Leeds Student Union website, they literally say, before you buy this, just to let you know, the research into this is really non-existent, but we do know that it can be really harmful. Don't wear it for more than 8 hours a day. If you start to struggle to breathe, you could have respiratory issues, you could have rib fractures. They say all of this on their website, yet it's still painted as, oh, this is such a progressive and inclusive thing to do, to give you money to buy these products, when it's the most harmful thing, not the most, I guess, but like one of, it can't get much worse than painting up a really damaging thing to give to young people with the guise of this is really progressive. And one of the most awful lies that is told about in this whole ideology is that if you don't let these young people do that, then they will kill themselves. And that is a lie that was told to parents when they were taking their children to the gender identity clinics. And it's the most horrific blackmail. But the more that lie, and I hesitate in saying it because I don't want to spread it even more, but that is a lie and there's no evidence to back it up. And by talking about it more, you almost convince these people that they are prone to suicide because that's what they're being told. The more you talk about suicidality, and I'm doing it now, but I'm saying it's not true, then the more likely you are to sort of perpetuate it. And journalists are trained often to say you have to be very careful about the way you talk about this, but it's almost like a glorified thing now and used to convince people that if you don't believe in this, you're contributing to the deaths of these children or young people. And anyway, I basically came to all of these realizations over the summer. So by the time I got to university, I thought, you know what, it's my last year. This is a really important issue, too important for people not to be talking about. And so I kind of just grabbed the bull by the horns and went with it and accepted that it might be tricky, but at the same time, I didn't ever expect my podcast was just a random thing that I started and I was really committed to it, but I never expected everyone to become aware of it because lots of people have podcasts at uni and some of them are really great, don't get me wrong, but they hardly become, campus wide known about. And
do you think it's because you're talking about something that others aren't willing to?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And not only that, but it's something that people think is like it's treated as blasphemous and bigoted and hateful. So yeah,
I mean, the rhetoric that does the best online is in kind of inflammatory stuff. And do you think that what you were saying was along those lines, or at least kind of not as spoken about, and therefore people are more invested in it because of that?
I would, in order to answer that question, I'd have to understand what you consider to be inflammatory, because lots of people would have said what I was saying was inflammatory. As far as I'm aware, I was just saying what I
almost
believe,
what they might see as inflammatory. It may not be inflammatory. You speaking about what you believe about trans people, but do you think that they would see this and be, oh, this is wrong and this is inflammatory, and that's why so many people were drawn to what you were saying?
Yeah,
and interested in it.
Yeah, I mean, one person I'd shared a couple of clips from Charlie's episode, and someone reshared it and said that feeling when you get a far right podcast on LSR before GTA 6. And it's like, it's very common insult to TERFs and say that you're just far right, and that anything, I mean, people get it you can say anything these days and suddenly you're far right. If you even, I mean, look at Rylan on ITV the other day for just sort of expressing a very commonly held opinion, and suddenly he's being called a fascist. So yeah, I mean, people definitely found it inflammatory, but that's no reason to. I mean, all I was expressing was my gender critical views, which are protected under the Equality Act. Like, they are recognised since 2021, thanks to Maya Forstater. They are views that are to be respected within a democratic society, and you cannot discriminate against someone simply for believing in the reality of biological sex.
But you believe that you have been discriminated against?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you think that's going to get better in the future? Universities especially, because they're supposed to be places of, you can go there and you have rigorous debates and discussions freely. And you're saying that hasn't happened.
I know you haven't been to university yet.
Yes, as we haven't gone.
That doesn't tend to happen a lot of the time, which is really, really unfortunate. Some universities are far better than others. I know that Exeter Uni is particularly good at maintaining freedom of speech, despite their sort of on the face of it, they might the student union will put up disclaimers, but actually nothing is really shut down, as far as I've heard anyway. But other universities are awful. I mean, I actually contacted the Debating Society at University of Leeds saying, would you host a debate with James Esses, who is a gender critical therapist? He was cancelled. He got kicked off his course when he questioned gender ideology. And I emailed them saying, would you host a debate between James Esses and someone else about trans ideology and women's rights? And the reply from the president said, we're not interested in hosting a debate around the sovereignty of a minority group. And it's really hard because most people have never looked into this issue and they think it's about hating individual people, and they think that's all it could possibly be, rather than the fact that it is a quasi-religion, the idea that a man can suddenly become a woman if he says, I identify as such. And I mean, look at the fact that we've had the Supreme Court ruling. It's a huge issue and the law is very clear, and university students still do not want to talk about it. And I think a lot of it is to do with the fact that not only has identity politics taken such a hold, and we all lived through lockdown and have been educated on TikTok, and have absorbed this victimhood mentality, which wokeism is, but also because a lot of young people identify as trans, if you have a if you come across a student who, that most people at uni, in my experience anyway, know of a trans person, and so they take it very personally because they can't separate the person from why it is that they think this way. And it's very hard to get people to understand that actually it's because these people are being harmed that I care so much about the idea that they have internalized about themselves. And I mean, there are lots of things, even if you talk about Islam in this country, people can't separate, they can't see how it's possible to separate an ideology from its people. And so it's just one of those cases. But yeah, it will have to get better, otherwise universities will be useless. And I can assure listeners out there, especially young people perhaps who think that what I'm saying is horrible, they won't be happy to hear. I promise you, TERFs are everywhere in your universities, but they're too scared to speak out, because even the academics are too scared to speak out. And I have so many friends now who I've met through just doing and talking about this, that are still at university, who are waiting for their time, waiting for the confidence, looking for those academics who need to step up, I'm afraid, who some of them are doing really great work behind the scenes, but they need to be more public with it so that students know that they will be backed up if someone comes for them. Luckily, the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act is in force from, well, it was in force from the 1st of August, but obviously people will be going back to uni very soon. And the guidance that's come from the Office for Students, which is the regulatory body that sort of oversees this, is very robust. And so universities are under a lot more pressure. Earlier this year, we saw University of Sussex fined over £500,000 for the treatment of Kathleen Stock and their really draconian policies on trans, which resulted in many other universities redrafting theirs, including my own, after Sussex was fined so much money. So things are happening, but that doesn't mean the culture at universities are changing. And it's yet to be seen whether that will change anytime soon.
I think it's really important that we're able to have these free debates where people are able to express different opinions to someone else. I think it's very important that you're able to look at someone else's opinion, not necessarily agree with them, but hear what they're saying openly. So what does the Free Speech Union do that makes this possible?
So the Free Speech Union in general is a mass membership organisation. We're non-partisan. What we do basically is almost, it acts a bit like insurance, and I don't mean that in a legal way. It's absolutely not. I mean it's like a safety net. So you buy membership, and if you get in trouble, we will be there to help you. And so we have just between, at the moment it ebbs and flows, but between 30,000, 40,000 members. We only set up 5 years ago. And we've dealt with over 4,500 cases. I have 6 case officers, so there's 6 people. We have 27 members of staff in total, and at the moment we have over 300 cases, individual cases open, and there's 6 people dealing with them. And actually 20% of all of our cases, which are our largest single category, is about transgender ideology and the use of pronouns, despite the fact that gender critical views have been protected in the Equality Act since 2021. Organisations still think that they can discriminate against people for, and just to clarify, by gender critical views, I mean believing that biological sex is real, immutable, and binary, and that gender is false, and that what makes you a man or a woman is whether you're male or female. It's hardly a controversial view unless you're someone who has absorbed this ideology and has, in my opinion, frankly, been brainwashed.
Do you not think we have a duty almost to prevent offending people who might think that way?
There's no right to not be offended. That's part of being in a democratic society. If I went after everyone every time that I heard something offensive, I'd be a very busy woman. Like, it's just such a ridiculous idea that, and I don't mean this personally. It's a very good question. People ask this all the time, but it's this ridiculous idea that people have these days that that you have the right to not encounter opinions that offend you. I mean, and that's why universities now are preparing young people as though their lives are going to be these really cushioned, you never, oh no, if that triggers you, then don't worry, we'll put there's not going to be trigger warnings on stuff when you leave uni. There might have been on your lectures, but that's not how life works. And unfortunately for many people, if they put their head in the sand when something offends them, we've gotten to the point now in the country in general where all of these issues have been repressed being spoken about because people are offended by them. And now we're at a breaking point where all of these progressive ideas have completely, whether it's cultural relativism or trans ideology, the two, well, cultural relativism, I think, has been the biggest one that's ended us up in this situation where people think it's the kind thing to do. But being kind doesn't mean that's the true and the right thing to do. And so I think that actually people should be taught how to deal with being offended. And actually that's what, so Arif Ahmed, who is the guy who basically runs the Office for Students, that's part of their guidance. So he said earlier this year when the guidance came out, students need to be taught, and students need to be ready to be shocked and offended when they go to university, which is a
how
core...
should they deal with that then?
I'm not sure how university is going to run this. I think the idea was that there would be sort of introductory lectures where you would literally just sit there and be like, okay, well, these are opinions that lots of students in particular may find offensive, but this is what is going to happen here. You have to be able to tolerate that. It's not about having respect for the opinion. There are lots of views that I do not have respect for, but I will tolerate them. And tolerating doesn't mean agreeing with. It doesn't mean having to indulge yourself in it in any way. It just means you have to tolerate in a free society that there will be people who say things that you think are really offensive, but that's no reason to stop them from saying it. Ultimately, offence is a feeling, and that's, I know it's so stereotypical and sort of a cliche thing to say, but we cannot legislate or create rules based on people's feelings, and we have gone, especially at universities, far too far down that path, and it's unfortunate because a lot of students have left university feeling like they haven't had a proper education. In some ways, I feel like that there were so many topics that just went untouched, and even when you thought, you were like, surely if we're ever going to talk about this issue, it should happen on this module, but it's just not spoken about. And many of my friends who are at university are so frustrated with it, and you're paying thousands of pounds for what's meant to be a top-class education, even at Oxford and Cambridge, and these topics are absolutely taboo. And if you dare do so much as to question it or say that you don't agree with it fully, you are opening yourself up to being targeted. And what I find so frustrating is that what happened to me really wasn't that bad. In the grand scheme of things, like relatively compared to, if everyone knew all of the cases that we hear about the Free Speech Union or the things that I hear from my friends that are happening to them at university, I wish that everyone could know about what's happening to them. But I was sort of in a very lucky position where I wanted to go into broadcast journalism, so I used it to my advantage as a springboard. And I'm sure Leeds Student Radio probably look back and think, God, wish we hadn't done that. So
yeah, they're probably a bit upset now.
One thing I'd ask is, especially for Free Speech Union, is that from my past experience, everyone has a different idea distinguishing free speech and hate speech. How does the Free Speech Union deal with something like that, where someone could say that something someone said about a trans person is hate speech, but then someone else could say that's free speech? How are they able to deal with that?
Well, lots of people have the misconception, I think, that the Free Speech Union somehow is trying to skirt around the law, but actually free speech protections that we have in this country are very strong. It's just that the public bodies aren't following them, and they're the ones breaking the law. So when it comes to gender critical views, they are explicitly protected in the Equality Act, and that includes the belief that trans women are men, and that is an opinion that you cannot sack someone for expressing. So I would have to, I'd need an example for, I can't imagine what would be said. I mean, personally, I don't think that there should be hate speech laws at all. I don't think that we should give the power to a state to decide what is and isn't acceptable. I think the only thing that should be banned is actual incitement to violence. And I think that the bar is way too, is it high or low? Can never remember. I think it's far too strict in this country. Yeah. For example, Lucy Connolly going to prison, and being sentenced to such a draconianly long stretch in prison. Like, I think that in order for free speech to really be protected, we should be going in the direction of the First Amendment in America, and they go by the Brandenburg test, which means that in order for something to be counted as incitement to violence, it has to be likely and intended to cause imminent criminal or unlawful behaviour. And that case, that was Brandenburg, either Brandenburg versus Ohio or Ohio versus Brandenburg. I can't remember which way ran, apologies. But it was a case of basically a white supremacist group marching through a black neighborhood and saying really, really horrific things, like the worst sort of things you can imagine. And they were cleared because it was decided that they didn't fulfill the 2 tests. And I don't think that we should be criminalizing people for saying really offensive things. I think it's a price. We should be putting people in prison for saying things. And by giving the power to the state to decide what is and isn't acceptable means that you do end up sometimes in Ireland at the moment. Sometimes it's very unclear whether it's illegal or not to misgender someone, which if it is illegal, then that is discriminatory against people who do not subscribe to trans ideology.
Would you, obviously you studied philosophy, would you not say it's almost a utilitarian thing to do to arrest people for saying things that will hurt a lot of people?
What do you mean by hurt?
By hurt, I mean it would offend them. They would feel uncomfortable and attacked.
I don't think we should be locking people up because someone feels uncomfortable about what they're saying. No, as I said, as part of a democratic society, I hear MPs in Parliament calling for blasphemy laws, and that makes me feel very uncomfortable. But they've been elected, so that is just part of being in a diverse country, or sort of a diverse array of opinions. I don't think that there is a duty of any state to protect people from being offended. And actually, states that have done that, it's always bad outcomes. And there are the ideologies that want to do that are normally the worst ones. And if you get to a point where you are silencing people because you're offended, then that's not democratic at all. And who gets to decide what's offensive? Like anything that there are lots of things that I say that do offend other people, but there's lots of things that those people say that really offends me. But I am more than happy to fight for their right to say those things. And I think it's very questionable when other people aren't happy to do that. I would love to defend a trans rights activist for their free speech, because because it's difficult, because most people who are being silenced for their views tend to be on the certain side of politics. And so the Free Speech Union often gets criticised for being right-wing. And it's like, well, we can only look after the people who come to us. And, 20% of all of our cases are about trans ideology and someone having gender-critical views. But more recently, we have defended people on the other side, so to speak. You don't hear about all of our cases because not all of them make the press, but we have. And I mean, our most recent one, a guy called Robert Moss, he's publicly criticised Toby Young, who's the director of the Free Speech Union. This Robert Moss guy, he has been a trade union member for 40 years, huge Corbyn fan, and he was arrested at 7 a.m., had his house raided by the police at 7 a.m. because he'd criticised his former employer on Facebook. And he said to me on the phone, if I'd heard of this happening to someone else, I never would have believed you. But now it's happened to me. And he's so grateful. He's a really sweet guy. He's so lovely. And he is so grateful for the help that the FSU have given him. And, it does not bother us one bit whether you align with Toby's politics or my politics or Sam's. All we care about is protecting people's free speech. And so, yeah, I would protect anyone, even if it really offended me. And it's a shame that other people don't return the favour. And I think there is a possibility with the rise of the woke right that people on the left will be silenced. Obviously now the Palestine Action thing. So suddenly people on the left are going on about free speech. It's like, hello, yeah, it's an issue. So it's frustrating because it'd be great if everyone could return the favour. But there are some ideologies out there, in my opinion, Islam and trans ideology, that are inherently anti-free speech. And so how do you deal with that is a very tricky issue, because I think that there are some ideologies, and if we're talking about trans ideology here, it relies on people not being able to disagree with it. Because as soon as you say that bloke in a dress is a man and he should not be coming into the women's toilets, it's like a spell has been broken. And they rely on compelling your language to uphold the ideology, the idea that women shouldn't have the right to single-sex spaces, and that a child who says that they don't like being a girl, oh, well, you must be like, as soon as you say, hang on a sec, no, I'm not going to affirm your identity because it's not true, and that's unkind to lie to a child, and it's not kind to women to tell them that they can't say no to a man. And so it really does rely on stopping people from expressing their disagreement to uphold it. And that's why it's hard to deal with, because it is inherently anti-free speech and it introduces its own blasphemy laws.
Yeah.
So that's why it's important for it to be challenged and difficult to know how to deal with it when it is so. It's like how much do you tolerate intolerance?
Yeah.
It's a age-old question.
In the instance that you just mentioned of the man wearing a dress, going into a ladies' loo, that person thinks it's their right to go there. That person in the dress would be offended if they were asked to leave, as offended as a lady might be that the man is actually in the ladies' loo. So who is right in that scenario when either way someone will be, offended? But
Yeah. Well, personally, I think that women's rights are more important than men's feelings. And that's what's been happening over the last 15 years, that men's feelings has suddenly become more important than the rights of women to single-sex spaces, which are extremely important. Women fought extremely hard, especially in second-wave feminism, to establish women-only rape shelters and sexual abuse crisis centres. I mean, before there was such thing as a single-sex toilet, women couldn't really go out to what is called the toilet leash because they couldn't really leave the house because there were no public toilets anywhere. So there was nowhere safe for them to go. And there was a long history of, establishing the fact that if women are going to be able to leave the house, there needs to be somewhere safe for them to go to the toilet. And in order to keep the bad men out, we have to keep all men out. And so the feelings of men who want to come into women's spaces, I'm sorry, do not trump the rights of women. But lots of people believe that they should. And that is really sad because women have fought so hard to get their single-sex spaces. And now suddenly, because a man says that he's offended that he can't come into a women's toilet, that, according to a lot of people, is more important than the rights of women.
Just changing the subject slightly, I was quite intrigued what you mean by woke right. Like, I've never heard
Oh, really?
that phrase before.
So the phrase woke right, forgive me because I can't remember. So Konstantin Kisin, and then there's this other guy who I can't remember his name, and maybe you could put it up on the screen because that's really bad that I can't remember his name. They sort of debate as to whether it was each other who came up with it first. So I was like, no, it was you. No, it was me. But the woke right is essentially, well, to start with, I think that Konstantin Kisin's definition of woke is really helpful also with Andrew Doyle. So Konstantin talks about this victimhood ideology, and that's what woke is, but then also from Andrew Doyle, it's also pretending to be the underdog the whole time, but actually they're being extremely authoritarian. So there's this obsession with victimhood ideology, pretending to be the underdog, but actually the most authoritarian, telling you what you can and can't say, that only some people are oppressed and that other people are inherently the oppressors. And so the woke right are people who, in my understanding, have almost been pushed so far. They're so fed up of woke progressiveness on the left, typically, that they want to do the same in retaliation and silence people that they disagree with. And it's hypocritical because they don't like the fact that they feel that they have, and in many ways have, had their opinions silenced and been shamed for talking about certain things. But now the response is to try and silence in the opposite direction and sort of cancel people for not being pure enough. So we are seeing now, unfortunately, unfortunately, because it is damaging. I hesitate because I do believe in everyone's right to express free speech and their opinions, but there is a very concerning rise of ethno-nationalism in this country. It's very fringe, I think, but it's rising, and they now are even turning on people who, even like Tommy Robinson, for example, isn't an ethno-nationalist, but it's sort of the online right, and now saying that he's not good enough, he's not right wing enough, and so that's sort of an example of what you could consider as being the woke right. People who want to now not silence, but sort of saying that that's not good enough, and maybe that's a bad example because they're not necessarily trying to silence him, but there are people out there who think that the purity, it's all about how pure you are, and on the left of things, being woke is, don't you dare question any of this. Otherwise, we'll call you a bigot and a transphobe and a racist and all that. And now on the right, there's this sort of small subsection of people who are policing the language of people on their own side, or supposedly their side. I mean, even within gender critical debates, women disagree on whether women who understand the issue with men coming into women's spaces will disagree as to whether it's right to misgender someone. There are some women who say, no, I don't think that trans women should be allowed into women's spaces, but out of politeness still call her she, her. But then there will be but I'm one of the other people who says, no, you have to be clear of your language. You should be calling this man he, because that's the reason why he can't come into the women's toilets, because he's a man. I mean, I respect everyone's decisions, but there is a lot of infighting and trying to police other people's language, despite the fact we've gotten to this point because our language was policed in the first place. So perhaps that's not very good summary, but it's just the reverse on the other side. People, obsessed with the purity of it all, obsessed with the language that you use. And I think it is just a reaction to what we've seen over the last 10, 15 years of identity politics. It's now flipping on the other side and it's becoming identity politics, but to do an example being ethno-nationalism, which is concerning.
Yeah. One thing I am intrigued about that is that the word woke obviously does have sustenance. It is a word that exists. But I think some people may use it in the wrong sense. Like I saw a Twitter post this morning of a woman saying that sourdough bread was too woke because you can.
Is that Alex Phillips?
Might have been because you couldn't spread butter on it, and it's not white bread. It's not thin enough. But how would you say the word, could be used properly so that it's not overused in a sense?
So much.
Yeah, it's used so much that it's almost losing the meaning that it could inherently have value in.
I mean, I throw around the word woke all the time. Even like today, my friend's starting a new job and he said, oh yeah, they've said that I don't need to be in until 10:30 to ease me into it. And I said, oh, that's so woke. But I think there are a lot, but I think there are a lot of things that can, I do think that the best definition of it is a combination of Konstantin Kissin and Andrew Doyle's definitions of an obsession with victimhood ideology and playing the underdog when actually you're really authoritarian. But there are lots of other things in general life that I think that words sort of adapt and change. And I understand that it's frustrating for a lot of people that it's used so much. But Alex Phillips, I'm assuming if it wasn't her, Alex Phillips tweeted something very similar the other day about sourdough. I guess it's just, I don't know, it's sort of the moving away from things that used to be very normal. And all of a sudden there's this sort of, I get it's it's hard to explain. I get what you mean. It's like one of those words where you just know that it's kind of a sort of a philosophical point where how like it's almost a family resemblance, like as Wittgenstein would say, that there are lots of things that just fit into that category. For example, having avocado and toast. It's the same as like it's so. I mean, they're silly things, but for a lot of people, the word woke is useful because you don't know what it is that brings these things together, but you know that it kind of comes under that category, and it is that family resemblance that you can understand between these two different things that come under the category of woke, which it does loosen its meaning, but it just has adapted and people use it in that way.
Do you think people use it excessively, in the instance of the sourdough, or people having different kinds of milk and things like that? Do you think that dilution makes it loses its meaning, lose the meaning, or do you think that's very fitting for that individual?
I don't really think about it that much. I don't think it's that. Sorry, it's not a very good answer. I don't think it's that important. No, I know.
That's cool.
It really doesn't bother me that much. I find it quite funny. Like that's sort of my sense of humor, calling everything that you disagree with is a woke.
It's quite funny.
But it is important, and for people to say that, oh no, woke is just being aware of social justice. It's like it used to mean that. It really doesn't anymore. And language evolves and adapts. And the old sort of ideas that were about social justice have adapted to the point now that they're also about suppressing people's speech and stopping people from talking about things that they're concerned about. So I do get your point. I mean, I don't really know what the answer is. I'm not very I never did philosophy of language at uni because I just could be asked. But
I've done a little bit at the moment, but it's not too riveting.
Yeah.
But going back, Ethan, you kind of asked about this earlier, but I'm going to rephrase it. So where do you, I would say this language has almost radicalized the rhetoric that you hear on TikTok and on media and everything. Where do you see the limit of freedom of speech? I know it might sound like a silly question because it's free, but where do you stop someone, or just they could say literally anything?
The only thing that I think should be banned is incitement to violence, and that has to be a very strict category, and that means being intended and likely to cause imminent unlawful behaviour or violent disorder. Because if we do have hate speech laws, that is relying on not only the government and Parliament to decide what it is that they define, but then the judges to interpret that law. And frankly, the sentencing remarks for Lucy Connolly, the judge referenced diversity and inclusion, and it's up for debate as to whether judges are able to remove their own politics from things, but there should only be a legal assessment of people's speech if it is to be criminalised, and any reference, and it is political. And I think this is the other thing that I think is very crucial to all of this stuff, that people don't think that their opinions are political. They think that it's just about human rights. But actually buying into the idea of equity, diversity and inclusion, EDI policies, that is a very political thing. It's putting identity above meritocracy. That's a political belief that what we should be valuing is whether you sort of value added to someone's background rather than how good is this person on paper, regardless of their attributes. And that is an ideology of a kind. I'm not using ideology in a derogatory way. It just is one. It's a belief system. And so if we do have hate speech laws and if we do restrict anything other than incitement to violence, then we're giving that power to powerful figures that I just don't think that's something we should be trusting the government to do and for judges to be interpreting. I think it's a price worth paying for genuine freedom of speech, that some people will say really awful things, but most people don't say awful things. And I think that people think that by not having hate speech laws, suddenly everyone's just going to turn into this massive, hateful bigger. Most people are decent people, and yes, there will always be people who say horrific things, but that's no reason to start criminalizing. I mean, prisons are overrun anyway. Let's actually tackle crimes that aren't to do with feeling offended and actually to do with whether it's stealing or actual physical abuse of someone or anything like that, which we already don't tackle enough. And let's not prioritize people's what they hear in one ear, making them feel a certain way. And so we have these laws like the public slip my mind, you might have to cut that. Why have I forgotten the name of this massive piece of legislation?
Is it the new one? What, Online Safety Act?
No. It's literally the 1986 Public Order Act. Sorry, the Public Order Act is a huge, massive piece of legislation, and you hear this sort of alarm, harassment and distress. And if you were to cause someone those things, then your speech could be considered illegal. And that was the case of Hamit Koskin. He's a political refugee from Turkey. And in February this year, he burnt the Quran outside the Turkish consulate in protest against the Turkish government. And so he originally was charged with harassing the institution of Islam, which is insane, because how can you harass an idea? Then that charge was dropped, and then eventually he was prosecuted or convicted of inciting religious hatred. But the evidence for which the CPS used to convict him of that was the fact that when he burnt the Quran, someone came along and tried to stab him. That was the evidence they used to claim that he had harassed, alarmed and distressed someone. Which is crazy, because it's like it's your fault that someone stabbed you, and that you made that person stab you. And it's just, that's the sort of, we have to be very careful about valuing people's or putting people's feelings of being offended above people's right to, might be offensive political expression, but it's political expression nonetheless. And those rights are supposedly protected under the European Court of Human Rights in Article 10, that you have the right to protest politically in sometimes really offensive ways. But now, for some reason, in this country, we are, I think, frankly, scared of what might happen if people express particularly views that some parts of society find particularly offensive. And so, yeah, it's we have to be very careful about where it is that we draw the line. That's why I think it's only incitement to violence that we should be, and genuine incitement to violence that we should be stopping or criminalising.
My only kind of question around that is, do you not think that in that specific instance, there's a lot of overlap between, obviously it's political, but it's also a religious thing, and about what it says in the Quran, and if you're doing that sort of thing around someone who might be a Muslim, and what it says in the Quran, and how dogmatic Islam is in what to do to people who are against Islam, which is like ties in with like jihad. And do you not think people know that and therefore anticipate that reaction and then have some kind of responsibility for that?
Do you mean
almost? Do
you mean as in like people shouldn't burn the Quran because they know that
they know what the dogma is surrounding doing that?
Do you not think that's a really Orwellian situation to be in?
I personally don't agree with it, so I'm not a Muslim. Okay. But from some, I'm just asking from someone's perspective. Do you not think maybe, I don't know, it's more of a religious kind of dogma
Well,
dogmatic
the
kind of thing.
conclusion from that point is that ultimately, don't you dare say or criticize my religion in a robust way, because I will try and kill you. And that's exactly what happened with Charlie Hebdo. I mean, all they did was publish cartoons mocking Prophet Muhammad, as they did mock every other sort of. They went after everyone, go after everyone, and that resulted in the murder of journalists. So people. I mean, and we still have a teacher at Batley Grammar School. He's still in hiding because he showed, as an example of what was considered to be blasphemous in Islam, he now has to live under security because he cannot possibly risk his own safety because there is so much threat to his life.
I suppose my question is like, is that kind of category error of like a political freedom of speech kind of?
I mean, every religion should be. There's no idea ever that should be free of robust and at times offensive criticism. And the idea that we should be cowering because of a threat of violence, like the idea that you shouldn't do that because someone once said to me, do you know how much Muslims believe in their God? And it's like, what, more than Christians and Jews? Or anyone else for that matter?
Yeah.
But there's a reason why, 94% of deaths from terrorist incidents have been perpetrated by people who are saying they're doing it in the name of Islam. It's gotten to a state now where the ideology has managed to scare people into not criticizing it or, robustly and offensively. And it is, of course it's offensive. I understand why burning any religious book is offensive to anyone, but you should be able to do that. And you are allowed to do that. It's not illegal to do that. And the fact that Hammett was prosecuted for doing so is outrageous. The idea that we should be prevented from doing or saying certain things just because there are some people out there who want to kill you for doing it. The idea that on itself should mean that you're the issue here rather than the person who wants to kill you is a really, dangerous conclusion to come to.
I think the only reason I think it's different is because that person believes like, right, God has literally told me this is what I should do if X happens, as opposed to saying like, I don't like you on the internet.
What because God has told them.
So it's almost like, should it be categorized as political as opposed to a theological?
It doesn't matter whether it's theological or political. It's just, this is the reality of whether the ideology is theological. I mean, I think Islam is inherently political. And I think Ayaan Hirsi Ali is a very important voice on all of this. She knows better than most people in the West about how Islam is very political. Whether or not someone believes it is a theological or political idea, the point is that is still the outcome of the idea itself. That is what Islam calls for. And that's not to say that everyone who is a Muslim believes that, of course not. However, there are enough people who believe it to be extremely concerning. I mean, last year, the name Yahya was the 93rd most popular name for boys in this country. It rose up 33 spaces, more than any other name. 583 families thought it appropriate to name their son Yahya. Yahya Sinwar is the name of a very prominent Hamas leader who was behind the October 7th attacks. And that's just one example of many. There's a concerning amount of British Muslims who believe that, who have sympathy with Hamas, who had sympathy with Charlie Hebdo, and these were figures reported by the BBC at the time, even though they didn't make the headlines, but it was still like, there are people here who do think that what's happened in this situation is something that should be seen as, have a sympathetic view towards. And we need to have a conversation about these things. And what do we do about the fact that there are a lot of people in this country, and a growing number of people, who really do not like the West? And this is one of my favourite quotes ever, actually, is from Andrew Gold. It's the two, to sort of wrap up this and to go back to sort of trans ideology and Islam. He would say gender gets you cancelled, Islam gets you killed. Talking about these things comes with a lot of risk, but it's so important that if we don't talk about it, either of these issues, by not talking about it, we are speeding up at the rate at which we are going to come to a massive disaster, frankly, and hopefully it's not too late, but something needs to be done.
Do you think it's regressive?
It's regressive to not uphold the right for people to talk about these things, but I just think it's dangerous to not talk about it. And it's only when people start talking about these things more that, someone has to do it. And it's my first sort of intellectual hero, I guess, with Christopher Hitchens when I was about 15, 16. I was so obsessed
I
with
went
him.
to a talk about him with Richard Dawkins. It's
Oh,
really good.
great. Yeah.
I really
was, New Atheism was like before it was trans ideology, New Atheism was my thing back in the day. And so, yeah, just the bravery of people like him. And of course, now people like Douglas Murray and Ayaan Ali and many others are having conversations that need to be had. And if we don't have them, then we'll be in a very awful situation that we kind of already are in.
Well, Connie, thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you so much.
It's very, very
It's been
intriguing.
a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.